Hello, this is Simon Brew. I'm the editor of Film Stories magazine, and a very warm welcome to a special episode of the Film Stories podcast.
Sorry about that. I literally had to fly in from outer space.
Come with me.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And movies that had stories.
The story just sucks them in.
This is just the beginning.
Film Stories. We would be honored if you would join us.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Film Stories with Simon Brew. I am Simon Brew. As always, there's absolutely everything you need to know about me. The aim of the podcast, though, well, title gives this one away. I'm here to talk of the story of film, and I tend to talk about production stories, marketing stories, development stories, behind the scenes stuff, really, all the things that go to make the films that we know and sometimes love. Just that, the films that we know and sometimes love. This particular episode, though, well, it's one of my occasional special episodes of Film Stories where I bring in filmmakers to talk about a project they've been involved with, and this one's really been building up for quite a while. So we start really back in 2014, which was when a company by the name of Locksmith Animation came into existence. Now, Locksmith got its name from its co-founders, Sarah Smith and Julie Lockhart, a director and producer who had met working at during their time at Aardman. Elizabeth Murdoch came in as a co-founder as well. And it launched with the idea of making high-end, digitally animated films in the UK, that this was generally the domain of Hollywood, or Illumination in France, or the Disneys, the Pixars, people like that. And the idea was, could we build something in the UK to rival the quality and the skill of what they were putting out over in the States? So it's been quite a journey really to get this far. I'm going to touch on this with 4 different filmmakers throughout the course of this podcast. That initially in 2016, Locksmith did a deal with Paramount Pictures, and Paramount was going to distribute its films. Then Paramount decided it was off in a completely different direction a year later when it changed management. And so Locksmith then signed a 3-picture deal with 20th Century Fox back in the autumn of 2017. However, as you probably know, 20th Century Fox then became part of the Disney empire, and Disney terminated that deal prematurely with just the commitment to releasing one film. And so Locksmith has now gone on to ink a separate deal with Warner Brothers. But that first film, a movie called Ron's Gone Wrong, is the sole film that it's putting through 20th Century Studios, basically through Disney, and that now lands in cinemas. So the film itself debuted at the London Film Festival just a week or so before this podcast is being released, and the basics of it are: it's written by Peter Baynham and Sarah Smith, who worked together on Aardman's Arthur Christmas, directed by Jean-Philippe Vine and Sarah Smith. The film's co-directed by Octavio E. Rodriguez, and it comes loaded with a starry cast as well. And at the point this podcast is being released, the movie is being released as well. It gets an October the 15th, 2021 UK release date. So I've done a couple of interviews for this. I'm just going to basically, the first one, I'm going to talk to Jean-Philippe Vine and Octavio E. Rodriguez, who was wearing an incredible hat, as I put across in this interview. Just so you can distinguish the voices, Jean-Philippe speaks with an English accent. We talk also in the interview about the sweatbox. Now, the sweatbox is an old Disney animation term where lots of people are bundled into a very sweaty screening room, or basically a very sweaty meeting room, and the films are constructively, let's just say, torn apart. So when I say sweatbox, that's the bit that I mean there. I also reference across the 2 interviews that you're going to hear a visit that I made to Locksmith in 2018 when I was working at Den of Geek, and this was when Locksmith threw open its doors for its big opening, effectively, I wouldn't say ceremony as much, but its big opening presentation to the broader world of this was what was happening in its London base. Now, Locksmith set things up for the film Ron's Gone Wrong, in that it would design the film out of its studio in London, and then the animation work would be outsourced to another London-based, that's crucial to them, animation studio, Double Negative or DNEG, and so that will come up as well. But for the purposes of now, what I'm going to do is let's go to that first interview. I'm going to play you a clip from the film so you just roughly get the tone of it, and then you'll be hearing from me talking to Jean-Philippe Vine and Octavio E. Rodriguez just after this.
Happy late birthday, Barney.
Oh, Dad, you got me one!
Hi, insert registered name. I am your...
My B-bot. B-bot. The B-bot, there's something wrong with it. It's not meant to do that.
I'm not meant to do that. I am for making friends. Does Barney need friends?
Well, yeah. Or, fun fact, he will not survive middle school.
I'm delighted I'm now joined by Octavio E. Rodriguez and his amazing hat, and Jean-Philippe Vine, the directors of Ron's Gone Wrong. Hello, how are you both? Are you well?
Good. We're great. We're super excited to talk about the film.
Yes. Well, I went round Locksmith in 2018. I think we briefly brushed just for a second. I was too busy stealing canapes at the time. And it was, I saw bits of this film on the walls of that building, and it was all very neat and all very tidy. But I remember talking to, I think it's one of the story artists at the time, just saying, we're just really working hard to break story at the moment. Yeah. And I'm just curious, can you try and encapsulate where it was then to how it is now?
Well, it was always kind of, in terms of the bare bones of the story and the central relationship, we actually never really deviated, which was kind of a gift, really, because, you know, having worked at Pixar, both of us, we've been in the trenches of helping to try and figure out the story, you know, really in quite fundamental ways for quite a while. But at that stage, we were really looking to kind of really true up the kind of secondary elements of the movie, like the world of the robots around them, the world of friendships, relationships, and try and build a really nice, tight, satisfying structure to it.
So, I mean, can you talk about how the two, because I'm aware you were in this one fairly early on, Jean-Philippe. Could you perhaps tell us how you came into it, Octavio, and how the two of you worked together directing this one?
When I came on, as JB was saying, they were in pretty much development and had the bare bones of the foundation of the story. But the idea was for us to keep that as our true north and try to make sure that we made this about, you know, friendship, the connection with tech, with kids, dealing with this idea of loneliness. And within that, when I read the script, it was something that was super exciting to me. And when JP had brought me on, he was just like, oh my God, this is what we're doing. I just want to be a part of it. It's so relevant as it is nowadays with tech. And we're not trying to criticize, you know, good or bad about it. It's more about how do we continue to stay connected.
One of the most memorable times I had ever interviewing anyone was some time with Glenn Keane, the legendary Disney animator, and I'm explaining that to podcast listeners rather than to you two. So, but one of the things that really struck me with him was he was fixated on someone sat the opposite side of the room who was just in an unusual position, a really awkward position. And he just looked at them and just told them they were beautiful and just explained why the asymmetry of it was beautiful, that's what he was striving for. In the nicest sense, and it's genuinely a compliment, your film seems to be striving to highlight imperfections. And I wonder how hard they are to capture, really, because even in the technology you're talking about, it reminded me of my ZX Spectrum at one point.
Oh, yeah. I'm really glad you said that, because you know, we are thematically, we're talking about imperfection in friendship and actually celebrating that. And that's, you know, really important to us. So the world design, you know, the audience is picking up on things subconsciously all the time. So we really try to build imperfection, beautiful imperfection into everything and into Ron. And, you know, we were nerding out on, you know, my first computer was a ZX Spectrum, and we thought of Ron as like a broken Game Boy almost. So for animators, it was great. They had all these 8-bit pixels that they could move around his face. They could even put his eyes on his butt at certain points in the movie, which was really awesome.
But when you were talking about, for instance, Octavio, you came in and you read the scripts at that point. What were you taking away? What were the bits, if you like, that you were looking to break yourself to bring those elements in?
I think the biggest thing, as being a parent with children myself, it's just like the sense of isolation. Children feeling like they are alone when they're not, and this idea of being able to kind of have that conversation was really important to me for the story. And Barney brings that in spades. He has this narrative tape about how he thinks people look at him or his friends, but with Ron, he's able to kind of have these conversations and realize that that's not true. It's this relationship they have, and that being perfect, the imperfect, the messy relationship of the friendship is what we were trying to push for. So it was really something great that we actually put that together, and then it's out in the world now. So
you talk. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we also massive shout outs to Sarah Smith and Pete Baynham, who originated this story, and Sarah's also a director. So we were this kind of directing unit and spreading ourselves through the trenches of animation, because it's a big battleship, an animated feature, and we found a way to collaborate in our different roles.
So, I'm fascinated by the fact that both of you have been through the Pixar process as well. And I'm an animation nerd from the outside looking in, and I read books on the culture of Pixar and the whole idea of the creative committee just pulling your work to bits, which just destroys my head even thinking about it. I don't want this to be a pandemic interview, but I read through your credits and you did have the whole sweatbox thing in there. And I'm just curious, how does that affect it? Because one thing I always took from the processes at Disney and Pixar was at least it was face-to-face and in person. And here, presumably, you're having to shape and be pretty brutal about your film over a Zoom connection. I'd imagine that's how it played out. Can you just talk to that a little?
Yeah, well, actually, this movie had a really kind of unusual gestation in the studio process. We began with Paramount. We were then... on this Fox, and we got some incredible notes from Emma Watts and Stacey Snyder, who are execs at Fox.
Because they're thanked right at the end, aren't they?
Yeah, but it was not so much the brain trust process, the kind of, the torturous but amazing process of the brain trust. You've got a room full of extremely smart people, basically dissecting your film and helping you. They want you to succeed. So it takes a robust gut to deal with that. With us, it was a little bit more kind of one-on-one with our execs. And then when we came into Disney's hands, it was actually, in a way, we drove our own notes, which was very unusual. But that was the way it operated at Disney. And we just kept on screening to them. They would give us kind of very much audience perspectives rather than kind of very top-down notes, which we really appreciated. And so the scary thing was, I think it was kind of us in an edit suite trying to trust our instincts, really. With
just
each screening,
make the best film ever.
Make the best version that we could do.
I think we did a good job.
Yeah,
I enjoyed the film. I've just watched it about 10 minutes ago, so the credits have just rolled. So yes, I really enjoyed it.
We're proud of the credits, by the way.
I watched all of those as well. I'm taken with the fact that you were making this film in between various corporate parents, and I'm always reminded when that happens of the story of how the only way being John Malkovich got through a studio system was it was in the midst of a big takeover, and it was a relatively small thing, with no offense intended, on an asset sheet of a much bigger takeover, which left them off radar a little bit to pursue. Are you saying that's kind of roughly what it was like for you?
Well, there was a certain trepidation on our part because we weren't really sure what Disney thought of us. We're an upstart company, founded by Sarah and Julie Lockhart, and very proud of being a startup right here in London. But we certainly were aware that Disney didn't really know that much about us until we screened the movie. And especially when the marketing team saw our movie, I think they really kind of resonated with the storytelling and also the potential for the film. And from that point on, we felt like we were like these this tiny crew in London that just kind of got incredibly lucky. And Disney have been massively supportive of the film going on from there.
Amazing.
So that screening where you screened it for them, presumably against a backdrop of, this was the point where Disney, I would imagine, was going through its putting stuff direct on Disney Plus and selling films off and stuff like that. Was that the tensest bit of the process for you?
I don't know if that was the tensest bit, because for us, we just wanted for this movie to be out there. And we were just very, very fortunate that Disney and the marketing team wanted to put this out into theaters and believed in what we already knew, that we really, really loved this film and this story. But that was us. We were just focusing on the true north of making this movie and just trying to do the best thing that we could.
Appreciating, again, this doesn't come across on a podcast. I mean, do you wear these spectacular hats all the time? Because I've just been looking at pictures of the premiere, and I mean, it's some outfit.
Oh, thank you. I just happened to have
it's hard to sit next to Octavio in any situation, really.
Can you talk about, I mean, one of the things that always struck me when Sarah was talking about launching Locksmith was that this, as much this was going to be a British digital animation company, it was very much with a global focus. Can you talk, therefore, about setting a very British film in America and what kind of the cultural touch points you were looking to hit with that?
Well, I mean, I think that what makes British humor work really well, it's the way we undermine ourselves, and it's maybe that played into the whole outsider perspective, the outsider story. I think really we weren't thinking too much, to be honest, about what's the British identity of this, because we're quite a global group of filmmakers. We're very kind of connected to that British heritage of children's literature and great storytelling and great animation. In fact, I've worked at Aardman, and so there's an immense kind of desire to build something very cool right here because the talent is here, But for Locksmith coming out of the gate, there was definitely an ambition that this story have a much wider reach than potentially something that was set and staged in the UK with just British voices. We've also worked in America. We have American crew. Pete Baynham lives in Los Angeles, and there's lots of kind of exchange. So hopefully we kind of gave this movie a voice that felt authentic to where Barney lives and the kind of milieu of, this kind of Northern California, Oregon world that we decided to stage the movie in.
I'm just coming up to the edge of my time, but I'm curious of this because this is the moment, obviously, for you two where you're feature film directors now. You premiered your movie, which looked like a spectacular afternoon for you. What happens? I mean, first of all, congratulations on that. But what happens when all the people are suddenly looking at you two and looking for you two to have the answers? And I'm just curious what the human being side of that is and how easily you slipped into that.
Wow, that's pretty amazing to think about. I think for me, and we've had this conversation many times, but whatever we do have the opportunity to do, it's you give back in twofold. So the idea is to kind of push forward, but at the same time, we're not going to have all the answers. We're hoping that the people that are around us as well, the talent, help us to kind of build and create other stories that are out there. But I think it's just a sense of being fortunate to do that and what you do with that to kind of tell new and different kind of stories. So I hope that's where I can go with that. This is me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been kind of humbling experience making a film, because coming from story and art, it's kind of those are very comfortable tool sets. And I've spent 3 years way outside my comfort zone. But what I'm really looking forward to is now deploying those things I've learned on the next project. And, as Octavio says, like, we really believe in knowing what you want to say, but really building a beautiful exchange with your crew and pushing for the best ideas. So we're in development and pushing on for something new.
Well, huge congratulations to you both, feature film directors, and I wish you the very best with your next film. Congratulations.
Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Take care. So then, for the second part of this conversation, I switched my attention to director Sarah Smith and writer Peter Baynham. Now, Smith and Baynham have a long history working together, not least on the aforementioned Arthur Christmas. For Peter Baynham, the last year or so has been quite a busy one as well, in that he was back in the world of Borat, co-writing Borat's subsequent movie film, which went on, as you're about to hear, to get an Oscar nomination for its screenplay as well. A couple of little bits before we go into this. First of all, I talk about the film Arthur Christmas, and in particular a sequence in the midst of that film where the family come together and play a board game. Now, this particular moment in the film I think is key to it. It's the bit where all the character dynamics really come into play, and I describe it as the eureka moment in the movie, but that's the one that I'm talking about. There are two little edits in here as well. So one is, and I've left it in because it's relevant to the conversation, my Zoom link broke down very early in, and so I've cut a little bit of it out so you don't have to listen to people saying where's he gone and shall we carry on and bits and bobs like that, but I've kept in the bit that contextually matters to the conversation. There's a bit towards the end of the conversation as well where I was relatively critical of an animated film from another studio that came out a few years ago. In the interest of fairness, I've just cut the name of that out, so that might sound a little bit abrupt, but it was important to the point I was trying to make, but I didn't think it was right to include it in this. There is one other just very slight edit where I've taken a spoiler for Ron's Gone Wrong out of the movie, out of the conversation as well. But with all that set up, what I'm going to now move you over to the chat I had with Sarah Smith and Peter Baynham about this film. Hello, both. Well done. I don't know how you got over the finish line, but bloody hell, you did. So congratulations.
I don't really know either, Simon. Yeah. Nice to see you.
The last time I saw the two of you, it makes it sound like we're best mates or something there. I'll rephrase that.
We are.
We are, yeah. Was back in my Den of Geek days. It was one of the last things I did was I came round the Locksmith facility that's in a posh bit of London I can't afford to go near usually. And I was just really taken by how people driven it was and how all the paper was on the wall. There were people talking to each other, and they were talking then about just breaking the story and getting it all in play. And I'm just kind of, it's bewildering to me what's happened to Locksmith as a company, and presumably to the film as well, in the 3.5 years since that moment. And I just wonder if you can kind of capture what it's been like being the human beings at the heart of.
Oh, we lost him.
We lost you.
Oh, hello. Frozen.
Ron's gone wrong.
You suffered a malfunction there.
Is that working? Am I back?
It is. Yeah. You were asking us about how to make a movie in the craziness of technology, and then technology killed you. You answered your own question, Simon, because basically the last 3 years have been exactly like that. I mean, making the movie during lockdown, the biggest issue is actually there was very quickly from Double Negative, respect to them, an incredible amount of technology developed within literally days, allowing people to remotely access their work computers. The big problem is everybody's internet connection. And every session, every single session, there would be a problem with seeing pictures in sync, with hearing somebody, people would drop off. And I think, and that was absolutely exhausting. And it was the humor of the crew and the willingness really to drive through it.
But when you were putting this company together, I think I remember you saying, because one of the things around that time was people like DreamWorks were outsourcing certain sequences to other parts of the world, and you had various bits of films of the same film being made all over the place. And you wanted to make something in the same place, roughly under the same roof, or certainly within the same city. I'm just wondering just about adjusting to that a little bit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I really passionately believe in human contact. I'm probably very old-fashioned.
It's overrated now.
Ironically, Pete and I are the exception to that, because we work online.
We don't like human contact.
We live in different continents, but then we've known each other so long that it's all right. We don't. It doesn't matter. We don't have to kind of decode or be nice to each other. Yes. But I really feel so strongly like a community of animators. They build off each other, and story artists. People see each other's work and they spark to each other. And the biggest issue, I think, the biggest difficulty going online was that we didn't have any of that. And it was our job, me and JP particularly, to create the communication between people by saying, you need to go and see what Mike did. You need to go and see what Helen did, make them look at each other's work. There was none of that for free. And so I still passionately definitely believe in a community of filmmakers working together in a real space. I still, even after everything, I believe in that. However, we now know that technology can allow us flexibility within that.
The two of you as writers, when you came to do Arthur Christmas in particular, which is a very special film to me, I remember talking to you both at the time, and you were saying it's just like you wanting to make films, accepting that kids are watching things like The Walking Dead and things like that, but they're not watching like Disney movies or stuff like that. And you seem to have taken, I mean, I remember the films of Paul Greengrass were your touch point going into Arthur Christmas, which I just thought was really fascinating. So where was you? I appreciate it. I think you've talked about Spike Jonze's Her was a catalyst with this one, but also you've both talked about how you uncover these things and find new things. So where were the touch points coming in? And in an era where kids now aren't even watching films for that long. So like mine are on TikTok and playing Roblox and stuff like that. The whole Grand Theft Auto.
So am I.
Yeah, well, so is mine. And I think part of the reason is maybe that we don't actually, take them seriously enough and give them big movies to watch. And so, for me, I mean, our touchstone's actually making the film. Obviously, Pete and I watched every robot AI movie, but it isn't really about AI. It's actually about a device. It's not really a robot movie. It's about your phone and your iPad and friendship in the world of those things. But we did watch all of those movies, but also E.T., Stand By Me, coming of age stories, Boy and His Dog stories, all of those kinds of were classic influences on the film, I think.
But I think also
Spielberg, it's very Spielberg in terms of the setting.
But also, well, once we watch those films, it's interesting that like any of those robot movies, good and bad, like they tend to be set way off in some theoretical apocalyptic future. And it was really important with us to like, this is about now. It's meant to be about now and to reflect now. So the device, we wanted the device to seem like something that'll could come out in 2 years' time. And, I want one as soon as they come out, obviously. I could do with some more friends. But yeah, so just to have that thing of just a thing that is a tangible world. And like Sarah said, we grew up on E.T. and you go,
and
want the world to be like that.
Also John Hughes movies, right? Yeah. Breakfast Club and all of those high school movies. Nobody's ever done a high school movie or middle school movie in animation before. Now I know why. So many characters. And we had not just kids, we also had kids. Every kid had to have a Bebot. So that was insanely challenging. But I also kind of thought, well, now I know why no one's done schools, but why has no one done schools? It's the biggest thing that kids do every single day. It's like a huge part of their lives. So, it's great to have done the first animated school movie.
I mean, you preempted one of my questions there. I listened to a podcast that Russell T Davies did. And he talked about when he's writing TV drama, it's like the hardest scenes he finds are the ones where there's 8 characters around a table and he has to give them all equal weight and equal time. And I was just going to ask you about that. When you've got so many speaking gadgets and people on screen at the same time, how do you know you've got that?
Well, it's a massive amount of reiteration and rewriting and then boarding and, because you have to make sure that your primary story is what's carrying it. But there was so much richness in the world in terms of the school world. And then we had the background of the technology world. We had so many ideas and themes and potential subplots. And it's really a question of culling, isn't it? We started with, especially when Pete writes, because it's just like,
it's like 70-page document for a half-page
screen. So, and it's a question of shaping and culling it down so that you have the prominence for the main story, but we touch on as many of those. A lot of the time, we had a giant secondary story for Savannah, for example. And in the end, we managed to shave it down to its essential pieces.
But we also wanted, because the thing is, obviously Barney, the central character, goes through a pure friendship story. And I always think of it like we're living in an on-demand era where you can just hit someone on your phone and somebody brings, like a butler will bring a pizza to your house. And like Barney's in a kind of friendship on demand universe where he has to learn about friendship. But then, like Sarah says, Savannah has the other story, which is a hugely relevant thing of obviously be careful what you wish for in terms of internet popularity, which is just trying to, let somebody have that experience.
One of the things, again, I saw you do this with Arthur Christmas, is the amount of stuff you show us as much as you actively tell us. And there is that, I don't want to go heavily spoilery on the film, but there is a really poignant moment in the movie where she sat on the bench lonely next to an indicator just saying how many friends she's got. And I just wonder if it was little touch points like that as well that were all, if for instance in Arthur Christmas the eureka moment was the board game, which I still think is a genius piece of writing, what the amount that seems to achieve, but what the similar eureka moments were with Ron's Gone Wrong.
You know, I think there were lots, and I actually, like, that scene always existed in my head, that there was always going to be like a lonely moment in the playground just at that point. But again, there were 15 versions of it, and lots of them were much longer. And a lot of the time it's simply kind of the, you know, exigencies of like timing, and you're sitting in edit and shrinking it down, and it ends up just being one moment. So when someone like you spots that, I'm very delighted, because you worry how much of that will disappear. But yes, there are many, many touches that in a way were bigger ideas that find their place in the movie as just as shading in the story. In the
also,
end.
it's an interesting that scene, because I never really thought about it that much, but a kid asked me after a screening the other day, he said, why does the device keep on telling her she's got all these followers when it's been, you know, she's been a little bit humiliated? And I said, well, and I thought, well, that's because the device that she's got doesn't understand, can't differentiate, and certainly can't access how she's feeling about anything. And that's part of what we're trying to explore.
I think, I can't remember who it is, whether it's McKee or someone, who says that you have to write, it's the equivalent of writing a novel to write a screenplay, but then you have to, you know, you have to bring it down, and you have to show, not tell, and you layer it in, but it should have the same amount of content as a, you know, 200-page novel.
I know, it hurts. It hurts.
I can see the pain etched in your faces there.
I think, though, you know, one of the eureka moments, I will say, just to answer your question more directly, is probably the idea of that friendship board, you know, how that code threads, how the friendship board threads through the movie. It comes in a few times, and it started off really as a kind of funny scene of how Barney was going to teach Ron what a friend was, and then it ended up having so many different meanings across the movie.
Those are great discoveries when you have
they're
things
great
like that.
discoveries,
I think it's quite indicative in my head. The bit I zeroed in on that board was the one that gave children permission to swear.
That was the art department.
Is that right?
That's so funny. That's I have to look at it. We didn't write that to
not my responsibility.
Well, but I mean, background details again. I mean, there were no shortage of them in Arthur. I distinctly remember the Thatcher book in Arthur Christmas, for instance.
That book on the shelf that said "Managing People You Don't Like."
You don't like,
and the Armani label on this thing. Yeah.
So I mean, it goes to me that you don't treat audiences as unintelligent. And I'm a frustrated parent. Well, you say you can't, but I think quite a few people do. I'm a frustrated parent who gets frustrated with surrogate babysitter films.
We make movies for ourselves. We go to the cinema with our kids, right? And the great movie, I mean, E.T. is a movie for every single age, isn't it? The greatest family movies are literally that. They are for all of us. And I also think the greatest animated movies capture some truth of childhood that is a building block of every adult. I always felt that about Toy Story, the idea of like the new baby that's coming up that your parents are now paying attention to, you know, the trauma of that follows everybody through their entire life of like, someone's coming up behind me, you know. And I think if you can find those emotions, in this case, it's literally how it feels to stand on the edge of the yard and see everyone else looking socially successful except you. And that is such a big feeling that hits kids. And it carries on through adulthood, and we all remember it. And that, I think, is the key to those movies which speak to everybody, I hope.
I'm determined for this not to be either a corporate interview or a pandemic interview. I do want to ask this, because ordinarily, just creatively throughout any film, there always strikes me as fragile moments when you're on the verge of losing it and you think it's not going to happen. And it does strike me that you had some, let's just say, interesting corporate backgrounds to this, with changes of ownership, etc., deals, etc., etc. Was there a point you thought it got so fragile you didn't think you were going to get this over the line?
I think, you know, any animated movie is an act of faith and hope. I was talking to two dear friends of mine, both of whom are extraordinarily successful creators, both of whom have seen animated movies not make it over the line. And I said to them, it's almost like, I sometimes feel that you're like, you know, it's like a run to make a try as a rugby player. You pick up that ball and you just keep running. And you know that people are coming at you and going to tackle you from all sides. You don't know what it's going to be. Is it a pandemic? Is it your finance? Is it your studios? Is it your company? You know, what's coming at you? But you know there are going to be those kind of flying tackles. And you just keep your head down and hold the ball and hope you make it over the line. And, you know, I'm very happy that I managed to have got 2 touchdowns, having made 2 films over the line. On Arthur Christmas, I used to always say, I'm the first director of Arthur Christmas, because I just assumed at some point I'd be fired and they bring someone else in, which is what always happens. So, and you know, the circumstances in which we did the touchdown on this movie and on Arthur, you know, they were very different and in a way lucky. I count myself lucky to have managed to direct 2 films, because, you know, so many lovely things don't
I always say
it.
like that any movie, but especially animated movies, like being in a plane that you have to assemble as it plunges to the ground. You've got the instructions. It's an IKEA airplane. It plunges to the ground. You've got to assemble it, whatever, like that. And
you just got to make it just so it skids over and gets.
I mean, I went through the bizarre experience last year of doing this and the second Borat movie. Yeah. During the pandemic, and seeing both movies get to that place of, oh no, because we'd literally made most of Borat and then the pandemic hit, and then we decided, no, we're going to go back out and write it again. So like to do these 2 movies, crazy writing, but they both happened. Amazing.
I've got about 20 seconds, so can I just ask this, because I think a happy ending. I really enjoyed the film. I'm just curious, how did that premiere feel?
Oh, great.
Amazing, because it's the first time we've been in a full cinema full of children and parents, which was just extraordinary.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Brilliant. Amazing. And that brought that particular conversation to an end. Now, the Wrong's Gone Wrong story continues as it heads into cinemas around the UK as of today, at the point this is being released, and then into America, where it's still getting a cinema release, which is taking place on the 22nd of October. The Locksmith story continues, although without Sarah Smith. She departed the company earlier this year. The firm now has a deal in place with Warner Brothers and is working on a couple of projects. One that we know of is based on a Richard Curtis children's book, but others are in development at its London studio, and it has come out the other side of a pandemic, although by the sounds of it, a little bit of a change company. Nonetheless, I think it's an achievement and a half to have got what it set out to do over the line, and it's from the point that the company was formally announced 7 years ago to the release of its first movie. I think shows the heft involved in making such a film, and I do think it's really, really something to have a company like that in the UK. Long may that continue. Which brings me to the end of this latest episode of Film Stories, this special episode. If you want to hear more from my waffling, you can catch me on Twitter at Simon Brew. You can find the entire Film Stories project at Film Stories Pod. Our magazines, Blu-ray, available store.filmstories.co.uk. Our website, filmstories.co.uk, has reviews, news, feature, all sorts of bits and bobs going up every weekday there. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/filmstoriesonline, on YouTube at youtube.com/filmstories. And if you want to support the work that this podcast does and the whole Film Stories project, I'd be grateful if you give our Patreon page a look at patreon.com/Simon Brew. Most important thing, as always, is that you're all okay and you all look after yourselves. I'll be back with you soon with your regular episode of Film Stories. Thanks as always for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.